The often neglected side of history, especially military history, is the use of occult sciences during wartime. For the most part, they're just passing acknowledgments. They'll say that this general, yeah, he consulted this oracle before going to battle, and then this is how the battle went. It's that first part that interests me the most. The soothsayers and the omen readers and the astrologers and the different fortune tellers, these people played one of the most significant roles in history. No king in the ancient world would make a decision without first checking to see how the stars are aligned or what kind of archetypes or symbols are present that may indicate a good or bad campaign. And these aren't just isolated events. They're likely as common as a business owner consulting an accountant or a lawyer to check how all the background things are going. And this is exactly what the job of these sorcerers were. They were checking if the stars had mandated it, if the heavens had decreed it, if the spirits or the ancestors were approving. But why were these occult sciences so important that kings would make decisions based off of what they said? If you've ever heard someone talk about sports and their team lost, you'll hear them say things like, "It wasn't a good week for my team. They didn't play well this week. Maybe next week they'll do better. This just wasn't their time." The way the language is, it makes it sound like the week itself had a role in how that team played. Regardless of how literal that statement is meant to be, that idea and that theme has existed for all of human history. If you could choose when your team played games, you would only schedule them on the weeks that they would do the best in. But substitute sports for going into battle, life and death situation, your family, your friends, your entire country is dependent upon this. You would want to make sure that everything between your shoes and the stars are lined up perfectly for you. Even if it's just a superstition that's going to affect your psyche and how you ultimately perform. But if you're told that all the omens are good and the gods are on your side and the stars have aligned themselves for you, even then you're just going to mentally fight or perform better. Every historian should be interested in these occult sciences. They should learn them and know how they work. You don't have to believe in it, but you should know it well enough to see it in your day-to-day life. It's kind of like historians learning how to use the weapons of those ancient cultures. They study the craft and the techniques and recreate it, and so that gives them an idea of how the battles went down. But in many cases, those battles wouldn't have happened if there wasn't a favorable astrological alignment. Whether they were casting runes or reading dream omens or reading livers or using the I Ching or consulting the oracle, many of these occult divinatory sciences had thousands of years of history and development and evolution. While it's unique from culture to culture, they all had their own ways of seeing things and symbols that meant something to them. History was done by individuals, and those individuals had their own beliefs and they had their own symbols that they associated with things. And their decisions would be a reflection of the symbols and the way that they felt. We'll never truly get into the mind of any historical figure, but we can learn in many ways how they thought through the archetypes of the sciences they believed in. For example, Alexander the Great's mother delayed her birth for a few hours at the advice of an astrologer in order to give Alexander the Great a better astrological alignment. As I said, you don't have to believe it, but you need to know it well enough because the people that you're studying, they did believe it. But this isn't just ancient history. You had Manifest Destiny, where they believed they had the divine right to expand west. Or especially in World War II, where the Nazis were fighting who they believed were their spiritual enemy. And they were trying to gather all of these occult artifacts and use all of this ancient symbology in order to win that war. They had scientists and researchers dedicated to finding out these occult practices. And a lot of what the Nazis were researching would become the focal point of the Cold War. But again, it comes down to when you're in a life or death situation, you're going to use everything or anything at your disposal. Whether it's real or you even know it's real or not doesn't make a difference. On the day-to-day level, people operate subconsciously on the occult and the supernatural. How often and how quickly do things become your lucky version of that thing? You wore a ring or socks or shoes on a certain occasion and it went your way, and so now that becomes your lucky thing and you want to keep wearing that every time you do that again. It starts as a habit and then it becomes a routine and then it becomes a ritual. Within our psyche, that's just how it progresses. The more that we repeat something, the more we start to attribute it to some spiritual or supernatural element. We apotheosize the objects and the ideas in our life. You'll also see gym dudes wearing Superman shirts. You wear that shirt because it's a symbol of the kind of strength that you want to embody. Some ancient soldier may have a symbol of their god of war in order to embody that characteristic. The main difference between now and then was that their archetypes and heroes and religious and personal beliefs were also intertwined with their sciences and their natural world. Ares was a god of war, but he also had a physical location in the heavens, and he had many different symbols and signs of his presence or his godly powers. It was more than just identifying with a sort of superhero. That god could have been a planet, star, or constellation, which means it has a position, and that position, if it wasn't in one of your placements, you didn't want to fight without the god of war being on your side. They believed that there were spiritual and archetypal patterns that had effect on them and the world around them. One of the best examples of seeing the occult side of history is in the novel The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. It's a dramatization of the Three Kingdoms War that took place around 220 to 280 AD China. So it blends all the political intrigue, the ambition, the betrayal, the tyrants, the heroes, the magic practices, and the legends. For example, one of the most famous battles in that war was the Battle of Red Cliff. Cao Cao, the leader of the Northern Kingdom, had amassed a huge army and a huge fleet, and he was going to finally end the war. The other two kingdoms had joined forces and were trying to figure out how to stop Cao Cao's navy. Working for the Southern Kingdoms is one of the most famous strategists in all of Chinese history. His name is Zhuge Liang, and in this novel he's a bit of a sorcerer. The plan they come up with is to change the wind, because Cao Cao is going to use fire arrows, and if they can change the wind, that's going to backfire on his navy. So in order to change the wind, Zhuge Liang commissions a huge and elaborate altar to be built. It's full of symbols and markings of the constellations and the hexagrams of the I Ching. Ultimately it works, the wind comes, and Cao Cao's navy is destroyed, and he is forced to retreat. While Cao Cao is retreating, they have an opportunity to capture him. The general that is in position to capture Cao Cao is Guan Yu, and there's fear that Guan Yu is going to be kind and let Cao Cao escape. But to this, Zhuge Liang says that the stars hadn't decreed Cao Cao's death yet. So he actually placed Guan Yu in that position because he knew he would do an act of kindness. It was to help Guan Yu's own sort of cosmic position, to improve his karmic fate. And so the whole book is kind of like that. They're trying to take advantage of certain alignments. They're trying to win the favor of the gods or the Tao. They're using the I Ching and other magical practices and other occult sciences. It doesn't need to be the most accurate or historic recounting of events, but it does give us a glimpse into the mindsets, into the motivations, and to the different personalities of characters. People did think of their gods or the enemy's gods and their cosmic fate and their karmic justice. We still behave and think like this. When a traffic jam happens, you say, "Why today of all days?" Now, whether you attribute that to coincidence or synchronicity or some other force is up to you. But for most of history, all of that was contained within their religio-scientific practices. Carl Jung has this story about a rainmaker in China that he heard about from his friend Richard Wilhelm, who was one of the first to translate the I Ching. He explained that Protestants were praying and the Chinese were trying to drive the demons of the drought away, but nothing worked. And so they called for this old man from another province who was famous as a rainmaker. All the rainmaker asked was a little house and some peace and quiet. After 4 days, clouds gathered and it rained. They ask him how he made the rain, and he replies that he didn't. So then they ask him, "Well, what did you do for 3 days then?" He said, "Oh, I can explain that. I come from another country where things are in order. Here they are out of order. They are not as they should be by the ordinance of heaven. Therefore the whole country is not in Tao, and I am also not in the natural order of things because I am in a disordered country. So I had to wait 3 days until I was back in Tao, and then naturally the rain came." It's this idea of causality and synchronicity and the role that you have within those. It's quite a bit different from how we think today, especially in the Western scientific academia. It's this sort of spiritual bystander effect. If things are not right in your area, well, you have to make them right within yourself first. I'm using that as a way to illustrate how these occult sciences were used by soldiers and by kings of ancient cultures. These forces and omens that they believed in were alive and interacting with them.